Hey, we're going to dive into our first gospel series tonight. We are, as I said last week, we're in the wisdom literature right now. So we kind of, from a narrative perspective, we have been talking about the kings, Saul, David, Solomon. When we got to David, we kind of stopped and talked about the Psalms a little bit because he's the author of many of the Psalms. And now that we've gotten to Solomon, we're not really going to get into his life much because there's not a ton to tell in the Bible. It tells a little bit about it, but he is most famous for wisdom literature. Solomon being the wisest king in the Bible who asked God for wisdom, then was the author of many of the Proverbs. Potentially, some people think of Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs maybe, but Job is also wisdom literature. So last week we talked about the book of Job and specifically the problem of suffering. Why does bad stuff happen to good people? Where is God in all of it? What do we do when that kind of stuff happens in our lives? That was last week's kind of wisdom conversation. This week we're going to talk about Proverbs proper, and I struggled. I've kind of honestly been dreading this particular message because I've been struggling to wrap my head around how to teach on Proverbs. If you've read the Proverbs before, a lot of times you'll get to a chapter and it'll have like 30 different pieces of advice, just one after another. You know, one verse, and they're all like golden. They're all brilliant if we could just soak into them. But sometimes, even if you read the Proverbs, you find sometimes it's hard to read a big chunk of Proverbs all at once because there's so many different topics and ideas, all this wisdom literature. Because that's what Proverbs are, right? Proverbs are these short, kind of catchy wisdom, nuggets of wisdom, I suppose, is how we might say it in this day and age. So how to sum up the entire book in one night. We're not going to do a series on Proverbs. That would be worth our while at some point. But to sum up the whole book in one night, I decided to dive into a passage it's actually Proverbs chapter 8. And we're going to read the whole thing and talk about it. And really, rather than talk about specifics of here's a good piece of advice or here's a piece of wisdom or a nugget over here, we're just going to say, what is wisdom in general? What is it? How does it operate? Why do you want it? And where do you get it? Those are kind of some of the questions that we're going to talk about tonight, okay? So let's dive directly into Proverbs 8. I'm going to read the whole thing. It's 30-some verses. We'll put it up on the screen, but it's really good stuff. So, does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud. To you, O people, I call out. I raise my voice to all humanity. You who are simple gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Listen, for I have trustworthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They are upright to those who have found knowledge. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight. I have power. By me kings reign and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern and nobles and all who rule the earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than fine gold. What I yield surpasses choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness along the path of justice, bestowing a rich inheritance on those who love me and making their treasuries full. The Lord has brought me forth as the first of his works before his deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago at the very beginning when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills I was given birth, before he made the world or its fields or any of the dust of the earth, I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary, so that the waters could not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, and delighting in the human race. Now then, my children, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction and be wise. Do not disregard it. Blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors and waiting at my doorways. For those who find me find life and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves. All who hate me love death. So this is a poem written by wisdom to all of us. So wisdom is represented here in the book of Proverbs and other places as a woman speaking about who she is. She's this kind of personification. It's a literary device so that wisdom can speak directly to us and tell us what she's all about, what she loves, what she hates, what it means to find her, and why we should do that. So let's start at the top. It says, she says, I, wisdom, stand calling at the gates of the city. I think that's a really compelling picture to think about. Yelling out at the gates of the city to anyone who will listen, come and find me. Okay? Now, why at the gates of the city? I did a little thinking about this week, and if you read the biblical story, cities, with the exception of Jerusalem, but even Jerusalem sometimes, cities most often represent kind of corruption. They represent two things specifically. One, they represent places where a lot of people gather. And whenever you have a majority of people or a lot of people, you tend to have bad behavior. You have people that are making a lot of the wrong sorts of choices. Cities represent, even in this day and age, cities represent where bad stuff can happen because you have a lot of people gathered together in close proximity. And so this picture here of wisdom is standing outside the gate of the city as people are coming in, calling out, don't go that way, come to me. Don't go the direction where everybody else is going. Don't walk the path that everybody else is walking, but instead, come to me, seek me out. And I think it's really interesting. The Bible's kind of romantic in those terms. And I don't mean romantic like flowers and roses and all that. I mean more like the romantic writers. If you read like William Wordsworth or William Blake, they're always trying to get people out of the cities and into the country. That there's something about stepping out of the rat race that causes you to slow down and focus on what's most important. There's something about being in nature or in the natural world, away from the majority, away from the noise and the chaos, that focuses you. And there's something about the Bible that's almost got this, over and over again, this sort of romantic take to it, where it's like, don't go that direction, down that wide road that everybody else is walking, but walk this narrow road with me into the wilderness. Almost, back to the garden. That's kind of what it is. Remember, creation story starts in a garden. It doesn't start in a city. Come back with me to the garden and learn what I'm like. So often the Bible is calling us away from the crowds, away from the distractions, and into a quiet place. And that's what wisdom is doing. She's standing at the gate of the city where everybody's going the same direction, where everybody's doing the same sort of thing, and saying, I have a different way for you that will lead you to life. That's what she says in the very last verse. This way leads to life, but you're going to have to turn aside to find it. I think about when we talked about Moses back in the book of Exodus, when he's tending his sheep and he sees a bush burning, and the Bible says he crossed over to get to the bush. He had to stop what he was doing and cross over, move to a different place to experience the presence of God. And so often that's true of us too. It's not that God's not at work in the city or that God's not at work in the chaos, but often we're not aware of him in it. And so if we want to see him, if we want to gain wisdom, we have to turn aside from what everybody else is doing. What Proverbs is telling us here is wisdom is not found with the crowd. Okay, and we can look at the world and see how that's kind of blatantly obvious. The world is not, as I look at the general sort of pace of life and the general tenor, the tone of what's happening out there in the world, as I read the news, I don't kind of think wisdom. Oh, there's wisdom just everywhere out there. As a matter of fact, I tend to think more and more that the world is becoming an increasingly foolish place, that we're becoming less and less mature, that we're becoming less wise. And often, if we follow just what everybody else is doing, if we live the way that everybody else is living, we're going to end up in the same place that everybody else is going. You have to, if you want a different result, you have to change the way that we're doing things. It's like a friend of mine always says, the machine is designed to produce exactly what it's producing. Whatever's coming out of it is what it's designed to produce. So if we have a system, a world, that's producing increasingly foolish behavior, that's producing kind of increasing animosity among people, like less unity, that's producing less peace and more war, that's producing more chaos, that's producing anxiety and stress and all this sort of different stuff in us, and depression. If that's what the machine is producing, then that's what it's going to produce. And the only way to not get those outputs are to change the machine, to change the way that we live. Jesus said it much simpler. He said, no good tree bears bad fruit, and no bad tree bears good fruit. It's going to bear the kind of fruit that it's made to bear. And so wisdom is standing here at the gates of the city saying, you know what's going to happen. if you walk into the city. You're going to get caught up pursuing the same things that everybody else is pursuing, and the results, the fruit will be the same as everybody else is getting. If you want something else, though, I have something else to offer, but you're going to have to turn aside to find it. Now, she says, I call out to all humankind. Anybody can have it. It's not exclusive. It's not just for a few. Anybody can have it, but it'll only be given to those who turn aside to find it. That's how God often works. He will give himself freely to any of us, but he will not force himself on any of us. We have to participate with him in the pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom is free, yet priceless. It's free yet priceless. It's available, but only if you want to go after it. She calls out, come to me. And she says, what I have to offer you here is more valuable than silver, more precious than gold, more desirable than rubies. There's nothing that you could pursue that compares with it. As I read this passage, for some reason, it almost felt like she's standing at the gate of the city giving the sales pitch. Does anybody else get that vibe? Like she's set up a booth outside of the gate of the city, and she's selling wisdom. She's selling what she's got. And she's trying to tell you, like, if you go in there, you're going to find all sorts of stuff for sale. And you could buy any of it, and like everybody else, it's going to last you this long, and it's going to produce these sort of results. Or you can come over to my booth, and you can buy from me, and what you're going to find here is going to be far rarer, far more important than anything you find in there. It's almost like, for some reason, the bit that's been running through my head has been that scene from the beginning of Aladdin, you know, where the genie's kind of disguised, and he's outside selling stuff, and he's got, you know, he's like, what does he say? He's combination hookah and coffee maker, you know. Also makes julienne fries. You remember that section? He's got this. For whatever reason, that's the picture that's been running through my head as I read this passage. Has been wisdom out there telling us, this is what I've got. She's saying, come over here and pursue this. It's more valuable than anything you have going for you, and I'll tell you why if you come over and check it out. If you come over and listen, it's almost like she's going to give us the whole sales pitch. If you go to the OC Fair tonight and walk through the exhibits, there are going to be people selling you all sorts of stuff, and they'll walk you through all of the features. And that's what this passage gives us. It gives you all of the features of wisdom. But first, you have to understand that it's worth it. You have to understand that there's nothing that's going to compare to this. The Bible constantly contrasts wisdom, it contrasts worship, it contrasts life with Jesus against the idea of money. That's what we have here. She says, it's more valuable than silver, more precious than gold, more desirable than rubies. There's nothing you could want that compares to it. And the Bible is constantly putting life with Jesus, pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of worship, who God is, up against money. And that tells us something, doesn't it? It tells us that tends to be the primary opponent to God in Scripture. It's almost like, as I was reading it this week, it almost feels like wisdom is jealous of money. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, you know how God sometimes will say, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. That he's looking at it and saying, I don't understand why you are willing to give all of yourself to the pursuit of this when it just doesn't last and it doesn't enrich. Now, there's a place for it in life. There's a reason that we go after it, and God even provides it for us to be able to use for his purposes. But at the end of the day, it's not nearly as valuable as wisdom. She's saying, if you pursue me, if you pursue wisdom, if you dedicate yourself to this, you will find a treasure worth more than anything else, any other treasure you could seek. So start here, and then everything else will fall into place. It's like Jesus when he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then everything else will be given to you. It's the story of Solomon, isn't it? I mean, you can even see how Solomon might have written these words, because that's what he did. God said, what can I give you? Solomon said, wisdom. Not riches, not power, but wisdom. And everything else fell into place because he ordered his life rightly based on the wisdom that he received. So wisdom is saying, look, if you go after me first, you get everything thrown in. You get your entire life. You get a world that works. You get a worldview and a system that functions properly. You get health. You get prosperity. You get all of this stuff thrown in. Doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect all the time, but if you're a wise person, all that stuff flows out of it. But if you pursue the other stuff first and not wisdom, you'll find that it doesn't satisfy. So she says, come to me first. You'll find in me a treasure worth more than gold. And then she begins to give the sales pitch. So we've all taken a break tonight. We've turned aside from the city. We've turned aside from the path where everybody else is walking. We showed up here tonight just to be together and talk about wisdom. Now let's hear her sales pitch, okay? She's going to describe to us the features, that's how I'm thinking about this, the features of wisdom. Like again, imagine going to the OC Fair, you want to buy a new blender. For whatever reason, fancy blenders are all the rage. And somebody's telling you all the different things that this blender can do. Well, that's what wisdom is doing here. Now, when you read it, you don't get that sense right off the bat. But she gives us all these words that to us, when we read chapter 8, just sound like synonyms. Prudence, knowledge, discretion, justice, truth, righteousness. We read that, and to us, it just sounds like it's kind of a repetitive kind of jumble. Like it's just saying the same thing over and over and over again. But it's not. Each of those words is a different word that means something different. And it's as if wisdom is describing to you, these are all the things that I can add into your life. If you'll buy, if you'll pursue me, if you'll go after me, this is what wisdom can bring to you, okay? So let's listen to some of the words that she gives us, okay? The first one, in several places, in verse 5, verse 6, and beyond, is knowledge. That wisdom, one of the features of wisdom is knowledge. Now, I've often heard people say, well, wisdom and knowledge are two different things, and that's true. Having knowledge is just information. Sometimes it's book information, it's stuff that we studied. Sometimes it's experiential information, it's stuff that we've lived. But it's having information in your head. And it's not the same as wisdom. It's not a replacement for wisdom, but it is a necessary component of wisdom. If you don't have knowledge, you can't be wise. There is something about pursuing knowledge that's an important part of wisdom. I think about, I was a literature major. Some of my favorite authors, one of my favorite authors is a guy named Victor Hugo, who wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame or Les Miserables, or some famous epic poems and stories. And when you read his stories, a lot of people don't like them because he goes off on these long tangents about stuff that don't really matter to the story. You know, like he wrote this book, one of my favorites, called The Toilers of the Sea, and he spends about 100 pages talking about the plant life of the Channel Islands between England and France. Or if you read Les Miserables, he spends about 70 pages talking about the stonework and the history of the sewers in Paris. And you read it and you're like, this is a lot, you know? But he just blows me away the stuff he knew. He was an author, he was a poet. But he was such a keen student, he voraciously consumed knowledge, that he could tell you the history of the plants on this island that he lived on, which ones were native to the island, which ones had been brought in, when they were brought in and by who, how they functioned, when they blossomed, when they didn't. He could tell you everything about them. And that was just one feature of what he knew. And you begin to realize that as you read his books, there is tremendous wisdom in his books. Tremendous insight on the art of living, and part of it is because he was such a voracious student of information. He studied people, he studied the world around him, and he was curious. People say the same thing about William Shakespeare. There's all sort of controversy around William Shakespeare because nobody's entirely sure who he was. Part of the reason people don't know who he was is because when you read it, you'll think that he was you. You know, if a soldier reads it, they're like, oh, this guy had to have been a soldier. He just understands war, like so clearly. Or if, you know, you're an artist, you read this guy was clearly an artist. Anybody who reads it identifies with it because he was such a keen student of humanity. He saw people, he saw the world, and that then provides a foundation for wisdom. Wisdom has to have knowledge built into it. And so wisdom says, one of the features that I can provide for you as you seek me is you can gain knowledge and insight into the world around you. That's actually part of how we go after wisdom. It's not the entirety of it, but part of it is by applying ourselves to the pursuit of knowledge. Okay, that can be done through education, that can be done through a library card, that can be done in all sorts of ways, but becoming a student, becoming a lifelong learner is a part of wisdom. It's a feature that you can bring to your life. So knowledge is one of the synonyms. But another one is prudence. This is a word we don't use anymore. This is an old school kind of King James word, but prudence just means wisdom and decision making. What's wisdom saying to us here? I can teach you how to make decisions. You just said that wisdom is telling us to have wisdom? Not helpful. Okay. Everybody on the video, that was my daughter Bouze. Anyway, she's telling us here, I can help you make decisions. That as you pursue me, you can get clarity on how to decide the difficult things of life, the big questions that come up. Wouldn't that be helpful? How many people have had to make a difficult decision recently and found that it's sometimes challenging to know how to go about making those decisions? The Bible says pursue wisdom, and one of the features is that you grow in the capacity to make decisions well. Prudence comes along with that. She says that truth and righteousness, or truth and rightness, are part of what she offers. This is in verse 7. That she offers truth, and I just look at the world around us and think there's so many lies out there. So much misinformation that we hear in the world today, and in every facet of life, whether it's somebody trying to sell us something by kind of overinflating what this product will do for our life, or whether it's the news outlets trying to get us to believe a certain worldview or philosophy, or whether it's, whatever it may be. There's all sorts of lies out there. What if we could be, the word I think the Bible uses often is discerning. What if wisdom could add discernment to our lives, where we'd be able to look at things, at truth and lies, and be able to know the difference? Be able to say, that's not quite right. That's what she's saying here. She's saying, I can give you discernment. I can give you sound judgment. That comes up in verse 14, kind of another synonym here for truth. I can give you sound judgment so you can tell when you're being lied to. You can tell when something is wrong. You can begin to feel it in your gut. We were talking, for some reason, we watched this movie the other night with Elijah, and somebody was playing poker, and he's like, what's poker all about? He's asking us, is poker hard? I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, but it just seems like it's a game of luck. And I was like, well, yeah, to some degree. It's about the cards you get dealt, but really the trick with poker is learning to read people. You're learning to tell when somebody's lying, or in poker we say bluffing or not. That's discernment, and there's an art to it, and people can grow in discernment around a poker table, but we can also do that in life. We can grow in discernment to where we're able to see clearly and know the truth from all the lies. Wisdom says that's a feature of what I can offer you. She says she can offer justice, or that justice is part of her makeup in verse 8 here. And when we think of justice, I think we tend to think of what we call retributive justice, which is somebody has done something wrong and they have to be punished for it. But in the Bible, only about 10% of the time the Bible talks about justice is it talking about retributive justice. The other 90% of the time it's talking about what I call restorative justice, or proactive justice. So it's dealing with the issues that cause injustice before they happen. So it's dealing with systemic injustices. It's dealing with poverty and oppression so that the stuff that flows out of it doesn't ever happen. Because a lot of times we'll see that when we're thinking about retributive justice, when we're thinking about punishing people for their crimes, the reason those crimes happen in the first place is because we haven't dealt with the systems of injustice over here that led to that lifestyle. So often the Bible is talking about justice as dealing with systems that cause people to be oppressed, that cause dysfunction in our world. And wisdom here is saying, I can help you with that. In other words, I can teach you restoration. I can teach you redemption. I can teach you how to be a part of shalom, of wholeness. Isn't that cool? I can teach you how to build wholeness around you. I can teach you how to heal brokenness and division. I can teach you how to bring unity. I can teach you about forgiveness. I can teach you about mercy and reconciliation. I can teach you about the things that bring people together and heal the world. That's really what wisdom is saying. I can teach you to heal the world. Yeah? I mean, that's a good feature, right? So far I can teach you stuff about the world around you, knowledge and information. I can teach you sound decision making. I can teach you how to see truths and lies and to discern the difference between right and wrong. I can teach you how to be a part of the healing of the world. In verse 12 she says, discretion is part of her makeup. Discretion, that word in Hebrew means purpose, planning, or intentionality. In other words, I can teach you how to set goals and work toward those goals. That's something that I've been learning a little bit about lately, Heather and I have been talking about lately, is like, I think a lot of times in life we look at where we want to be, and it seems far away. But if we just set a goal, made a plan, and work toward it, in incremental steps, you can get to where you want to be over time. That's kind of how it works. It's the famous, how do you eat an elephant? one bite at a time. You make a plan, and then you go to work. And wisdom is saying, I can teach you how to do that, whatever it may be. Whatever the goals, whatever the ambitions or dreams are, I can teach you how to order your life with intentionality and with purpose so that you're no longer just saying, I want to be there, I hope someday I can be there, I'm trying very hard to be there, but you're instead taking steps that get you where you want to go. That's wisdom. There's wisdom in planning and in intentionality. There's wisdom in training versus trying. You know, that's how Dallas Willard talks about it. When most of us have an ambition in life, whatever it may be, whether it's a physical thing about us that we want to change, or it's a mindset thing that we want to fix, or it's a financial goal, we have a place we want to be, and we try really hard to get there and find ourselves never arriving. Well, it says there's a difference between trying and training. Today, I can't run a marathon. I just can't. If I went out and tried to do it, I would not do it. But I could run a mile, and probably a week from now I could run a mile and a half, and so on and so forth, until eventually, if you train well enough, you're running 26.2. That's what he's talking about here, and that's wisdom. Wisdom isn't going out and trying to run the marathon today. I've met people who've done that. They've shown up and they've tried to run a marathon out the gate, and they make it a couple of miles. Wisdom is training, and she can teach us that. That's one of her features. It's discretion. She says, I offer good counsel. I mean, I love that we have therapists in this day and age and counselors. I love that we have a community where we can get good advice from other friends. And hopefully, if we have a community that's pursuing wisdom together, we're able to offer sound advice to one another. But wisdom also says, I can teach you to have good counsel within yourself. To where as you're looking at the world around you and wondering what you should do in a given circumstance, your own mind will be a good counselor to you. Interesting, huh? Often our minds are working against us. We're having to battle our own kind of, backstories or negative internal dialogues or whatever it may be. We're having to battle our upbringings or bad advice that we've heard before. But wisdom says, if you pursue me, I can teach you good counsel so that you can be a wise counselor for others. I love that. That's a feature of wisdom. She says in verse 14, I have insight. Another kind of way of translating that is nuance. When you look at the world, sometimes things are a little bit unclear. Sometimes circumstances are a little bit blurry, and it's hard to discern exactly what's going on. And I can help you pierce through the fog and see clearly. That's what insight is. See clearly into the truth of a situation. Nuance. I think if you read the book of Proverbs, it's really interesting because the first half of the book of Proverbs, it sounds like really good, solid advice that your grandpa would give you. It sounds like, honestly, I probably shouldn't put it in these terms, but it sounds like stuff that if you're a political conservative, you get really on board with. It talks about stuff like, saving up for a rainy day and working hard and all this sort of stuff. And we look at all of it and we're like, yeah, that's, if you're more conservatively bent, you should be a hard worker and you should save up your money. And if you work hard and you do all this, then you're going to be just fine. And that's in Proverbs. And we stand up and we cheer and we look at that and say, absolutely. Work hard, save your money, you'll prosper, you'll be fine. But later on in Proverbs, it also talks about how there are systems of oppression that hold people in poverty. That sometimes it's not enough to work hard because you're working against a system that you can't defeat it. And you look at that, and if you're more of a political, a liberal, you look at that and you're like, that's right, there are these systems that have to be crushed and da-da-da-da-da. And you say, what's the deal? Both of these things seem to be at odds with each other. Which one is truly wise? And the answer is both. You have to have insight to understand that sometimes both are true. That sometimes people just have to work harder. But sometimes working as hard as you want will accomplish nothing. I've been places in the world where people work insanely hard and cannot, because of where they live, get ahead. It's not their fault. They were born there. Wisdom is able to tell the difference and not just throw down a simple saying at your feet. Well, just work harder and you'll be fine. But sometimes it's also able to say, maybe if you just applied yourself a little bit more. But it knows the difference. It knows when to say one versus the other. Does that make sense? It's able to deal in a world with some grays. It's able to see the nuances in situations and understand that sometimes the world is more complicated than just a really simple saying that will solve everything. If there was a simple saying that would solve everything, we'd all be doing it. But the truth is, you have to have insight to understand when to say what, which is why the book of Proverbs gives us both of those perspectives. That's just one example. It says it gives us insight or nuance. In verse 14, it says it gives us power. Notice that? I love that. Wisdom just says straight up, I have insight, I have power. I just think about Jesus when I read those words. Remember when Jesus was teaching in the synagogues and people would come to him and they were amazed it said they were amazed at what he would say because he spoke as one who had authority, had power behind his words. When he spoke, stuff happened. Things changed. When he spoke, they noticed that his life and his words matched up. That's power. When he spoke into the world, things changed. It affected people's lives. It transformed the world around him. There's power to wisdom. So here's wisdom saying to us, and I'm kind of belaboring the point here, but I can give you knowledge. I can give you good decision making. I can help you understand the difference between right and wrong, truth and a lie. I can teach you how to be a part of the healing of the world. I can teach you how to make plans and goals and work toward them. I can give you good advice in your own mind. I can help you see the differences between the different shades of gray in the world out there and still be able to pierce through to the heart of what is. I can give you power to live well. Those are the features of wisdom. She'll even tell you some of the safety features of wisdom. She tells you here what she doesn't do or doesn't like. She says, I hate pride and arrogance. Okay? So I will teach you how to not be so self-reliant. I'll teach you a humility that helps you understand that you don't know everything. Wisdom teaches you that the older you get, the less you know. As your world gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you realize, man, I don't have this thing figured out. That's wisdom. It teaches a humility that then gives us a sense of reliance on others, reliance on God, reliance on wisdom itself. Defeats pride and arrogance. She says, I hate evil behavior and perverse speech. Interesting. One of the things that wisdom will protect us against is our own mouths. I hate perverse speech. I'll teach you how to control your tongue. We read the book of James. James is the wisdom literature in the New Testament. It says the tongue is like a fire. It can set a whole forest on fire. It causes so much damage with the things that we say. And wisdom says, one of my safety features is I'll teach you how to control your mouth. It's funny, I ran across this thing a couple months ago. I tried it a couple times. It's been a humbling experience. But I ran across this thing that somebody called the tongue challenge. Basically was like, see if you can do this, and I'm going to throw it out to you, and you're welcome to give it a shot. But see if you can do these 4 things for 24 hours. Okay? You ready? Here it is. Don't cut anyone down. Don't gossip. Don't speak unkindly, and don't defend yourself. It's a lot harder than it seems. But that, if you look at that, isn't that a portrait of Jesus? Don't cut anyone down, don't gossip, don't speak unkindly, and don't defend yourself. That's wise. I look at, if anybody I knew was actually able to accomplish that, if I was able to accomplish that, I would say, this was a wise day. I spent this day wisely. I was wise with the words that came out of my mouth. Wisdom will teach us how to do that. Teach us how to live that kind of way with our mouths, because the stuff that we say is also has the potential to cause damage. And if she can do all that, if she can teach us how to embrace all these things and can give us the life that flows out of it, teach us how to avoid all these other things, then truly wisdom is more valuable than gold or silver, worth more than rubies. And she gives us a quick insight into why that is. She says, it's because I was there when God created the world. I love that. It shows this picture of her like dancing around as God is creating the world. Just relishing in his creation. Just enjoying God's creative activity. And what's what's being said here in Psalm 8 when or in Proverbs 8 when she's talking about being a part of God's creative activity is she's saying that when God designed the world, he wove wisdom into it. In other words, there is a pattern to creation. There's a way that the world works that you can learn. And if you learn it, you can live in it well. Okay, just like there are natural laws that govern the world around us, physical laws. And when we try to violate those physical laws, all sorts of bad stuff happens. There is such a law as the law of gravity. And if you try to violate the law of gravity, you will end up in a bad place. However, if you begin to understand the laws of gravity and some of the other laws that accompany it, laws of air resistance and thermodynamics and all this sort of stuff, then you can embrace it to do some really cool stuff. You can actually glide on it. You can, embrace the laws of motion to surf on a wave instead of just being crushed by it. You can begin to understand how the world works in such a way that you are now using the laws of the world to your advantage to help you live well. Does that make sense? The same is true of the moral and spiritual laws of the world. God wove a certain way of being into the world, not just kind of from a scientific perspective, but from a moral perspective. There's a way of living that is right. I know that's a controversial thing to say in this day and age where everything is just kind of do whatever feels good to you, but there's a way of living that's right. And when we live it, we find that we are enjoying God's creation, that the word that's used here is we're prospering. Doesn't mean everything's going to be easy, but we're prospering. And when we violate it, we might not experience immediately that sudden crash that we would when we violate the law of gravity, but you will eventually. We can kind of defer the consequences of violating God's moral and spiritual laws, but they will come calling eventually. But if you embrace them, as wisdom's saying here, if you embrace them, if you go after me, if you seek me, then you can harness the moral and spiritual laws of the universe in such a way that you will prosper. You can use them to soar, to surf on the waves. The stuff that would normally be crushing or would cause you to plummet now works toward your benefit. You understand how the world works. I was there when God created it. So come to me and I'll tell you all about it. I'll tell you all about how it works. Seek wisdom. So, that's the sales pitch. Turn aside. Don't walk the path everybody else is walking. Come, listen to what I have to say. You'll find here a treasure worth more than anything else. Here's the list of everything it can do for you. It works that way. I promise it works because I was there when God created it all. Now the question is, how do we get it? And she gives us really 4 words, 4 verbs that tell us how to get wisdom, okay? The first one is listen. She says that at the end. Listen. Listen to what I have to say, which in other words is pay attention or seek. I mean, if we want to get wisdom, we come here. There are books of the Bible, whole books of the Bible that are set aside for it. Read the book of Proverbs intently. I hope tonight has maybe even demonstrated just that, to myself at least, it demonstrates how flippantly I tend to read the book, because I never actually dug into these words in Proverbs 8 before. And no commentator that I read this week did either. Just was starting to look at it and realize, I just think that all these words like prudence, righteousness, justice, knowledge are just saying the same thing over and over again, but it's not. It's showing us different facets of this diamond that is wisdom. And so study, understand, listen to what she has to say. She says, do not disregard. That's the second piece of advice. So listen to what I have to say, and then do not disregard it. In other words, don't let it go in one ear and out the other. When you hear wisdom, put it into action. Do it. Live on the basis of what you've heard. Jesus says, blessed are those who have not only heard what I have to say, but put them into action. Right? He talks about how people who hear his words but don't act on them are like people who build their houses on the sand. It's bound to collapse. But people who hear his words and do them are the ones who build their house on the rock. That's what wisdom is saying here. Hear it and put it into action. Third thing she says, this is all very similar, is watch daily. Watch daily. I love that. This is at the end of chapter 8. Verse 34. Blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors. I love that idea of making it a daily goal to grow in wisdom. Like, what if that was part of our goal every day? We woke up and we said, today, I want to be wiser than I was yesterday. And so I'm going to watch intently at the door of wisdom to learn something new about the world, to gain more insight into decision-making, to understand the ways of justice better, to be more discerning about right and wrong, good and evil. I mean, what if those were our goals? What if we had, I guess what I'm saying is, what if we set wisdom goals or moral goals for ourselves? Today, I want to grow in wisdom, in authority, in power, in insight, in prudence, in virtue, in justice a little bit more. Watch daily. And then she says, and receive. Remember, this whole thing is a gift. God wants to give wisdom. In the book of James, again, it says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives freely to all without finding fault. If you want to grow in wisdom, you just ask and receive. You ask and receive. It's a gift that God will give freely. You have to seek. You have to do the work. But if you do, He will give you what you're asking for. Now, this is the first gospel series, so there's a bunch of stuff on wisdom, Proverbs 8, all this good stuff. But, of course, you know we have to land in a very specific place here. What I love is if you get to the New Testament, this section here in the middle of Proverbs 8 where it talks about wisdom being there when God created the world, it sounds very familiar to me. And as I was reading it, I realized it sounds familiar. It's not exactly the same, but it sounds familiar because it sounds also like John chapter 1. John chapter 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him. Without Him, nothing was made that has been made. And it speaks about this Word of God being present with God as He's creating everything, being part of God's creative activity. And that word in Greek, the word in Greek is logos, which at the time had connotations not just of the idea of a word written on a page, but logos had the idea of wisdom. So when it's speaking of Jesus, the Word of God, the logos of God, being present with God at the beginning, it's saying the same thing that Proverbs 8 is saying. That Jesus is wisdom with God in the beginning, creating the world. He is the one who helped to establish the natural laws of the world. He is the one that formed everything around us. And if we look to Him, we can learn from Him how to live well. And I love that because if you were in Solomon's day reading the Proverbs, you look at that and you'd be like, that's really good. I should try hard to do that. But it's kind of a little nebulous. It's a little spiritual or psychological or difficult. But if you read it in light of Jesus, now you have a face. You have a person you can look at and say, well, let me just look and see what he did in a situation that was similar to this. That's why Paul says it so clearly in 1 Corinthians 1. He says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and things that are not to nullify things that are, so that no one may boast before Him. It is because of Him that you are in Christ Jesus, get this, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as is written, let him who boasts boast in the Lord. Do you hear that? Jesus Christ has become for us the wisdom of God. God incarnates wisdom. In Proverbs, it's this personification. It's this literary character saying, come to me, and I'll teach you. It's this kind of that we have to use our imaginations a bit to picture this woman standing at the gates of the city. But in Matthew 11, an actual person stands in front of us and says, come to me. Come to me and I'll teach you. Take my yoke upon yourself and learn from me. He has become for us the wisdom of God. So I want to add one more piece to wisdom's advice here. If you want wisdom, spend time with Jesus. Read His story. See what He was like. Talk to Him. Listen to Him. Hear from Him. And you'll become wise. And that is a treasure worth more than anything else. That's why in John 6, when everybody bailed on Jesus and except the 12 disciples, And Jesus looked at him and said, aren't you going to leave too? Everybody else just took off on me. Aren't you going to leave too? Peter says, where else would we go? You alone have what? The words of life. There's nothing that compares. We're going to stick with you.